Illinois Governor JB Pritzker tried to take a shot at Donald Trump, calling him a frightened wannabe dictator. But only moments later, Trump struck back with a sharp response that left Pritzker embarrassed. The exchange stunned the crowd and quickly went viral. Yesterday morning, Trump shook the internet by posting a bold meme on Truth Social. The image showed soldiers alongside the words, "I love the smell of deportations in the morning." Chicago is about to find out why it's called the Department of War. The post sparked outrage and applause. Some people cheered, others were alarmed. Trump wasn't bluffing. He had already drafted plans to send the National Guard into Chicago, a city struggling with crime, violence, and illegal migration. For him, it wasn't politics. It was about protecting families who no longer felt safe walking their own streets. Hours later, Governor Pritzker fired back during a press conference. In front of cameras, he declared, "Donald Trump isn't a strong man. He's a scared man, a wannabe dictator who wants to occupy our city, break the Constitution, and destroy democracy. Illinois will not be intimidated." The crowd gasped. Pritzker thought he had landed a knockout blow, but what came next left even his supporters stunned. The media jumped on his remarks. Networks like CNN and MSNBC replayed his words on loop, and late-night hosts clipped the sound bites "wannabe dictator" and "scared man." Social media exploded with trending hashtags, while Chicago residents faced another bloody weekend, 52 shootings and 11 deaths. Families mourned their dead, and neighborhoods lived in fear, yet Governor Pritzker seemed more focused on clashing with Trump than tackling crime. Inside the White House, Trump calmly scrolled through headlines on his tablet. Advisors urged caution, but he leaned back with a faint smile. "They think they can shame me out of protecting Americans. Wait until they hear what I have to say," he remarked with quiet fire. Back in Illinois, Pritzker doubled down, telling reporters, "The president has threatened to go to war with an American city. We must resist authoritarianism." His dramatic words drew headlines, but many ordinary citizens watching from home shook their heads, asking, "Doesn't he care about the murders? Doesn't he care about us?" The next evening, Trump addressed the nation from the East Room. Millions tuned in, both anxious and curious. Standing tall at the podium, he declared, "It's a shame Governor Pritzker can't clean up his own city. Chicago has led the nation in murders for 13 years straight, yet instead of fixing it, he cries about me stepping in." The audience leaned closer as Trump continued, his tone cutting. "Get some self-respect, Governor. Go on a diet. Do something, anything that shows dignity. Right now, the world sees you as a sloppy, miserable failure." Gasps echoed across the room. Trump's eyes narrowed as his voice thundered, "Chicago looks like a war zone. Innocent Americans are gunned down every weekend while the governor defends illegals and corruption. Enough is enough." It wasn't just a speech, it was a reckoning. Pritzker, once confident, suddenly looked powerless. Across Illinois, TVs lit up diners, barbershops, and living rooms. Families who had lost loved ones to gun violence wiped away tears, nodding at Trump's words. For them, it wasn't mockery. It was the truth no leader had dared to speak. Meanwhile, in Springfield, Pritzker sat in his office as aides whispered nervously. What he thought was a winning attack had backfired. His phone buzzed non-stop with messages from donors, allies, and critics, some urging him to fight harder, others warning him to tread carefully. Reporters shouted for a follow-up, warning Trump he had gone too far. But he walked away with trademark confidence, leaving the country buzzing. This wasn't just a comeback. It was the first shot in a storm that would soon shake Chicago, Illinois, and the nation. On Chicago's South Side, families replayed Trump's words. A grieving mother who had lost her teenage son to a stray bullet wept softly. "Finally," she whispered, "someone sees our pain." On the West Side, business owners gathered in a cafe, shaking their heads at Pritzker's press conference. "He calls Trump a dictator, but we already live like prisoners," one man muttered. "I just want to open my shop without dodging gunfire." Mayor Brandon Johnson tried to defend Pritzker on local TV, but his message fell flat. Citizens flooded radio shows and social media with anger. Stop defending illegals. Stop ignoring crime. Do your jobs. Even some Democrats broke ranks with lawmakers quietly saying, "We need solutions, not insults," by midnight. Trump's meme still dominated the internet, not as a joke, but as a warning that many saw as strength. The stage was set. Within hours, the National Guard was mobilizing. Morning came heavy with tension. Helicopters hovered above Chicago, while convoys of National Guard vehicles assembled on the city's edge, waiting for orders. News stations aired live footage of troops standing ready. For many residents, the sight didn't bring fear. It brought relief. Governor Pritzker, however, lashed out at a hastily arranged press event. Sweat ran down his forehead as he shouted, "This is tyranny! The president wants to occupy our state!" But his words rang hollow. Outside, the crowd heckled him. "Do your job, clean up Chicago." When Trump spoke again, his tone shifted. Calm, almost fatherly. "I'm not at war with Chicago," he said. "I'm at war with crime, with corruption, and with the chaos that destroys innocent lives every day. That is my duty as your president." His words struck a chord. Across the country, people felt a surge of pride, believing that real change might finally be possible. But Governor Pritzker knew that if Trump's plan worked, his own failures and secrets would be exposed. By noon, voices from Chicago began pouring in. On a radio show, an ICU nurse named Elena Cruz called with trembling words, "My brother was shot walking home from work. I don't care about speeches. I care about safety." The studio went silent. Listeners cried. Soon, teachers, pastors, and small business owners joined the chorus, pleading for safety, not political drama. Then the host announced a surprise caller. The line clicked, and President Trump's voice came through. "God bless. We're working with federal agencies, the Guard, and community leaders. We're not here to bully. We're here to protect." Stunned, the host asked, "Mr. President, are you listening to these families?" Trump's reply was steady. Every word. "The priority is safe streets for mothers, fathers, and children. Nothing else comes first." Outside, Elena covered her mouth and wept. For many, this wasn't politics anymore. It was personal. At the State House, Pritzker's aides rushed in with new polling showing public support for Trump's actions surging. The governor clenched his jaw and snapped, "Schedule another press conference." But the mood had already shifted. In homes and corner shops, people whispered, "Maybe this time, things will change." On live TV, an Illinois procurement clerk, face blurred, described how contracts were funneled to shell nonprofits. Aid for migrants vanished in paperwork fog. Invoices showed hotel rooms no one used, food deliveries that never arrived. Reporters sat stunned as the clerk admitted, "We asked for audits. We were told to wait." The broadcast cut to a neighborhood pastor who had begged for after-school programs. Tears welled in his eyes. "They told us there was no money. But there was. It just never reached our kids." Back in Washington, Trump met with the Attorney General and DHS leaders. "Document everything," he ordered. "Help the honest people on the ground." Meanwhile, Pritzker rushed to a podium calling the leaks political. But TV screens split in half. On one side, the clerk's receipts. On the other, the governor's denial. Even loyal supporters squinted at the evidence. Elena messaged her neighborhood chat. "If this audit is real, we might finally see where the money went." A shop owner replied with a prayer emoji. By sunset, the city buzzed. Not with outrage, but with hope. If the receipts held up, excuses were over. Proof doesn't cry. It speaks. That evening, neighbors gathered under orange streetlights at the corner where Elena's brother had been killed. No cameras, no speeches, just hymns and candlelight. For once, with a patrol car parked nearby, the block felt protected. Then, a black SUV pulled up. Secret Service agents stepped out, followed by a familiar figure. Elena froze. Trump approached quietly. "Ma'am," he said, "I heard your call." He didn't pose for pictures. He listened to a grieving mother, to a teen who slept on the floor to avoid stray bullets, to a pastor who had buried 2 boys that summer. "I can't bring anyone back," Trump said softly. "But I can bring back order. We'll audit the money. We'll support the good cops. We'll clear the streets. You have my word," Trump said. Elena's candle shook as tears rolled down her cheeks. Not from anger, but from the relief of finally being seen. 2 blocks away, a news van arrived too late. All they captured were fading taillights and neighbors finishing one last hymn. For the first time in years, hope felt heavier than fear. And warmer, too. Just after sunrise, a joint team from the Inspector General's office and DHS entered a quiet state building by the river. No sirens, no drama, just briefcases, sealed envelopes, and a short list of names. A weary clerk slid a cardboard box across the table. Inside were binders, invoices, and a gray flash drive labeled Community Aid Consolidated. Each item was logged carefully. Chain of custody. No mistakes. Across town, a legal aide in Pritzker's circle stared at her phone as urgent texts piled up. Freeze disbursements. Hold statements. No more emails. She set the phone down and buried her face in her hands. Outside the building, reporters gathered. A woman in a navy suit stepped to the microphones. "We are auditing funds intended for safety and services. We will work with local leaders to ensure help reaches families." At home, Elena clutched her rosary and whispered, "Please let the truth be clear." Somewhere in those binders and that flash drive were the answers, where the money went, who signed off, and why children were still dodging bullets after endless promises. This time, the numbers might speak louder than slogans. Later that afternoon, Trump walked into a district station that smelled of coffee and copier ink. It wasn't a rally, just roll call. Officers stood in a narrow hallway, helmets on belts, body cams blinking blue. Trump's voice was steady. "I want 2 things. Protect the good people and respect the Constitution. Every step documented." He pointed to a whiteboard covered in pins. "Hot blocks get light towers, cameras, and joint teams. The Guard handles logistics. Police stay on the front line. Curfews only on the worst corners, not the whole city. Clear rules. No cowboys," Trump said firmly. The superintendent nodded. "We'll brief every shift." In a small conference room, Trump sat with 3 mothers. Phones were stacked face down. Elena entered last, holding a photo of her brother. "He worked nights," she whispered. "He never hurt anyone." Trump leaned forward. "We'll set up a victim support line, run by real people who answer on the first ring." He turned to an aide to make it happen. That night, an officer rolled a portable light tower into a dark lot. The bulb flickered, then filled the block with bright white glow. Children stopped and stared. For the first time, the street didn't feel like a trap. It felt watched, even protected. Meanwhile, Pritzker's team scrambled to stage a primetime speech at a downtown theater. Lights, banners, and a polished podium. He hoped for a reset. But networks split the screen. On one side, the governor's stage. On the other, a live town hall in a church gym on Chicago's west side. Folding chairs, families, a chalkboard reading, "We want safe streets." Trump stood there with a handheld mic, no teleprompter. "No one's marching on Chicago," he said. "We're standing with it." Tonight, the first funds are redirected to real programs. Tomorrow morning, every citizen can track every dollar on a public dashboard. A volunteer projected the site. Line items lit up, block by block, vendor by vendor. Gasps spread through the gym. "That's our school," someone whispered. Meanwhile, at the theater, Pritzker stumbled over his speech, reaching for water as the cameras cut away. In the gym, a boy handed Trump his Little League cap. "Can we play outside again?" Trump knelt. "That's the goal." Minutes later, a court clerk filed an emergency order. Preserve records, freeze questionable payouts, compel cooperation. Phones buzzed across the city. By dawn, Springfield staffers were in chaos, digging through file cabinets, unplugging shredders, locking laptops. The illusion of control was cracking. In a dim stairwell, a young aide clutched a manila envelope. Inside were receipts from a community center that didn't exist. Shaking, she dialed the hotline Trump's team had released the night before. "I can't keep this secret," she whispered. Within an hour, federal investigators had the documents, evidence of massive overbilling tied to migrant housing projects, money funneled through fake vendors. In Washington, Trump read the first summary. His face hardened. "This isn't incompetence," he said. "This is theft from the very people they claim to serve." Across Chicago, headlines shifted. For once, newspapers weren't filled with body counts. They were exposing corruption at the top. At a North Side bakery, regulars flipped pages over coffee. Elena walked in, still in scrubs. Someone handed her a paper. She whispered a prayer and smiled faintly. Truth was finally breaking through, stronger than fear. That afternoon, a rally grew on the West Side. No polished stage, no professional signs, just handwritten posters and borrowed bullhorns. The message was simple: protect families, not fraud. Reporters expected chaos, but found order. Parents spoke from the heart. One father lifted his shirt, showing scars from an old shooting. "I never saw my governor once," he said. "But today, I know someone in Washington heard me." Elena stepped forward, trembling, holding her brother's photo high. "He worked nights. He never hurt anyone. Don't tell me this is politics. This is life. And if the president can help clean this up, let him." The crowd erupted. Applause, tears, chants of "safe streets now." Even skeptical networks aired it live, unable to ignore the raw humanity spilling into the streets. At the governor's mansion, Pritzker watched the coverage, pale and shaken. His attempt to brand Trump as a wannabe dictator was collapsing. Ordinary citizens weren't calling for rebellion. They were pleading for protection. The microphone was no longer in politicians' hands. It belonged to the people. As evening fell, breaking news lit up every major network. State employee turns whistleblower, alleges orders to bury audits. Cameras cut to a dimly lit room where a woman sat beside her lawyer. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled. "We were told not to process red flags. Money meant for housing and safety was diverted. When we asked questions, we were threatened with reassignment. I can't carry this guilt anymore." Her words hit Illinois like an earthquake. Radio lines lit up. "We knew it," callers cried. Finally, someone told the truth. On Air Force One, Trump listened to the briefing. He leaned back in his seat and said quietly, "Courage. That's what breaks corruption. One brave voice at a time." Meanwhile, Elena returned home from her shift. Her youngest brother ran to the door, tablet in hand. "They're showing the lady on the news. She's telling the truth." Elena hugged him tightly, tears soaking his shirt. For the first time since her brother's death, she felt the city wasn't sinking deeper. It was finally climbing toward light. Someone had broken the silence. Someone had chosen truth over fear. In Springfield, the governor's mansion blazed with light. Advisors whispered frantically, scrolling feeds that had turned against them. Hashtags like "Wicker Chicago deserves better" and "Fast Pritzker exposed" shot up the charts. Pritzker slammed his fist on the table. "This is a witch hunt. We'll frame it as Trump attacking democracy." But his aides avoided his eyes. They had seen the documents. They knew the numbers didn't lie. Back in Chicago, National Guard patrols rolled through key intersections. For the first time in months, some blocks were quiet. No sirens, no gunfire. Just footsteps and the steady hum of light towers. Families peeked from porches, whispering prayers of thanks. Walking home from her shift, Elena looked up at the night sky and whispered, "Maybe my brother's watching this." The candlelight vigil still burned in her heart, and she carried that hope back into her neighborhood. At the White House, Trump reviewed live updates. Calm but steady, he told his team, "Stay focused. Let the truth unfold. Illinois needs justice, not noise." Outside, the headlines roared, but inside the halls of power, the unraveling had already begun. By morning, a bombshell story hit the press. A former aide, anonymous but verified, leaked emails showing direct orders to bury audits. One subject line read, "Delay all reviews until after election." Screens lit up. Headlines screamed, Commentators who once defended Pritzker changed their tone. "If these emails are real," one analyst said, "this isn't politics. This is systemic fraud." Inside the governor's mansion, aides argued in hushed voices. Finally, one snapped, "You told us it was under control, but the walls are caving in. If this holds, we're finished." Pritzker barked back, but the loyalty had cracked. His circle was no longer united. Across town, Elena's community center held an emergency town hall. Mothers, teachers, and pastors gathered with newspapers in hand, passages highlighted in yellow. One father stood and said, "If this is true, then every promise they made to us was a lie." Trump's earlier words echoed in their minds. Courage breaks corruption. And now, courage, both from whistleblowers and citizens, was reshaping Illinois before their eyes. That evening, Trump addressed the nation from behind a desk, an American flag at his back. No crowd, no fanfare, just his voice. Illinois deserves honesty. Chicago deserves peace. We are not here to occupy. We are here to protect. And when leaders choose corruption over citizens, they will be held accountable. His tone softened. To every mother who's lost a child, to every father afraid to let his son play outside, I hear you. America hears you. We will not turn away. Millions watched. Some wept openly. At her kitchen table, Elena sat with her family, her brother's photo beside her. Through blurred tears, she whispered, "He finally said it." The speech closed with a challenge. This is not about party lines. This is about right and wrong. Stand with safety. Stand with truth. Stand with America. Social feeds exploded. Even longtime critics admitted Trump's tone was powerful, even presidential. For many, it was the moment doubt broke and hope began. Meanwhile, in Springfield, Pritzker's phone buzzed nonstop, donors, lawmakers, and allies all asking the same question. How much longer can you last? By midnight, the governor's mansion felt less like a home and more like a bunker. Staff moved in silence, afraid to speak. With emails leaking, whistleblowers stepping forward, and families rallying in the streets, the crisis was spinning out of control. Finally, one aide broke the silence. "Governor, the networks aren't airing your statements anymore. They're only showing testimonies from grieving families." "It's over." Pritzker's face turned red. "It's over when I say, it's over. Trump is staging a takeover. We cannot let him win this narrative." But the aide quietly slipped away, phone in hand, and minutes later called a contact in Washington, offering cooperation. His circle of loyalty was collapsing from within. Across Chicago, the streets felt different. National Guard convoys rolled quietly, not as a threat, but as order. Streetlights stayed on. Kids played under their glow, something parents hadn't seen in months. Walking home, Elena pressed her hand to her chest. "It feels safe," she whispered. Clips of Trump's calm town hall-style words replayed across social media. Even skeptics admitted. It sounded less like politics and more like leadership. That morning, a handwritten letter went viral. A grieving father from Englewood had penned it after burying his daughter, killed by stray bullets just 2 weeks earlier. His shaky cursive read, "I buried my little girl in a white dress. Not one state official called me. Not one checked on us. But I turned on the TV and saw a president speak about our neighborhood like it mattered. If this is what a dictator looks like, maybe we need more." The letter, photographed and posted by a local pastor, spread faster than any headline. Hashtags flipped from mocking Trump to defending him. White safe streets and Keecher stand with Chicago trended within hours. On Air Force One, Trump held the letter in silence for a long moment. Finally, he said softly, "This is why we don't back down." Meanwhile, in Springfield, aides begged Pritzker to, advisors urged Pritzker to respond with compassion. But he chose defiance, calling the grieving father's letter a political stunt. The move backfired instantly, widening the divide. At work, Elena read the letter on her phone. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she printed it out and pinned it to the hospital bulletin board. Nurses, patients, and visitors stopped to read, many weeping in silence. By the third day, crowds gathered outside federal buildings downtown. But this time, they weren't protesting Trump. They were demanding answers about state corruption. Homemade signs filled the plaza. Where did the money go? Protect our kids. Reporters noticed the shift. What began as outrage against the president had turned into a grassroots movement against the governor. From Washington, Trump spoke briefly. "This isn't about me. It's about restoring safety and honesty in a city that deserves better." The simplicity of his words disarmed critics who expected bluster. Desperate, Pritzker staged another press conference. But when he tried once more to brand Trump a wannabe dictator, a voice from the back cut through. "You're the one who let our kids die." Cameras caught it. Networks replayed it again and again. In her kitchen, Elena watched the clip and clutched her brother's photo. "Justice is coming," she whispered. Across Illinois, thousands echoed the same words. The tide had turned, and it was no longer in the governor's favor. By morning, downtown Chicago was unrecognizable. Crowds filled the plazas, not rioting, but demanding answers. Parents carried posters with photos of their lost children. Teachers held signs that read, "Books, not bullets." Over and over, the chant rose, "Where did the money go?" Federal marshals stood guard as investigators carried boxes of files inside. Cameras swarmed, but the real story was outside. Ordinary citizens speaking their grief, louder than any politician. Elena stood near the front, clutching her brother's picture. Beside her, a woman whispered, "My nephew, too." Tears blurred their signs, but they didn't step back. On a giant screen nearby, Trump appeared. Trump appeared briefly on a giant screen via satellite. His voice was steady. "This isn't about politics. It's about your families. And I promise, the days of corruption feeding on your pain are over." The crowd erupted, clapping, crying, chanting his name. Inside the governor's mansion, staff closed the blinds. The chants outside, broadcast live across the nation, drowned out anything Pritzker could say from a podium. That afternoon, federal investigators raided 2 nonprofit offices tied to his inner circle. Cameras captured agents hauling out boxes stamped finance and program expenses. News anchors cut in live. This is no longer speculation. This is an active probe into state corruption. Pritzker paced furiously. "This is a stunt. They're humiliating Illinois," he shouted. But his aides exchanged uneasy glances. They knew the humiliation wasn't coming from Washington. It was coming from their own mismanagement. In a Joliet diner, truckers watched the raid on mounted TVs. One muttered, "About time." Another raised his coffee cup. "Finally, someone's cleaning this mess." In Elena's hospital break room, nurses leaned closer to the screen. Some wept, others whispered prayers. Elena texted her family, "It's happening. Justice is moving." Briefed by his advisors, Trump gave only a short nod. "Stay calm. Stay lawful. Let the facts bury the lies." Across Illinois, hope was no longer a whisper. It was marching, loud and unstoppable. That night, Pritzker demanded airtime to address the state. Networks carried it reluctantly, and ratings showed viewers tuned in with doubt. At the podium, sweat beaded his forehead as his voice shook. "This is nothing but political persecution. Trump is turning our democracy into a circus." But mid-speech, a voice from the back cut through. "You failed us, Governor." Cameras swung instantly, capturing the raw outburst. Security rushed in, but it was too late. Clips spread online within seconds. On social media, the contrast was brutal. Trump's calm, fatherly tone earlier in the day, side by side with Pritzker's furious, sweating tirade. At home, Elena watched with her family. Her youngest brother frowned. "He looks scared." She whispered back, "He is," because the truth was catching him. By midnight, even national outlets that once defended Pritzker were questioning his future. He had set out to humiliate Trump, but instead, he had humiliated himself before the world. And for the first time in years, it was the people turning the tables. The next morning, a clip shook the country. A grieving mother stood outside a Chicago courthouse, her hair pulled back, her voice trembling. Holding up her son's blood-stained hoodie, she spoke into the microphones. "My boy was 15. He was shot walking to school. I begged for help. Nobody came. Now the president is doing what our leaders wouldn't. If that makes him a dictator, then call him one. But he's the only one who cared." The video spread faster than any headline. Across America, tears fell as people replayed her words. Hashtags like "Not for our children" and "I Chicago deserves better" surged to the top. In the White House, Trump watched in silence. His eyes narrowed, but his voice stayed steady. "This is why we fight. For her, for him, for every family like theirs." Meanwhile, Pritzker's press team begged him to show empathy. Instead, he dismissed the mother as a pawn in Trump's show. That single remark detonated online. Within hours, even members of his own party began to distance themselves. At her hospital desk, Elena wiped her tears and whispered, "Her cry is every mother's cry." And this time, the world finally heard it. By afternoon, another bombshell hit. An audio recording surfaced from a private call between Pritzker and a donor. His voice was sharp, laced with frustration. "We'll lose this battle if the guard stays. We need them out before more records leak. Do you understand? This can't hit the next election." The donor hesitated. "But what about the families?" Pritzker snapped. "Forget the families. This is about survival." The tape aired within hours. News anchors replayed it in stunned silence. Analysts shook their heads. This isn't just political miscalculation. This is cold disregard for his own people. On Chicago's South Side, neighbors gathered around phones, listening in disbelief. An elderly man pulled off his cap and threw it to the ground. "He never cared," he muttered. Not once. Trump's advisors briefed him on the leaked tape. Leaning forward, his tone was firm. "Families will know their president stands with them, not against them. That's the difference." The nation now saw two leaders in sharp contrast. One dismissing lives, the other defending them. The divide had never been clearer. That evening, Chicago glowed, not with rage, but with candles. Thousands filled the streets in a silent march. Mothers carried framed photos. Fathers held signs painted with names. Children raised small lights that flickered against the night sky. The procession stretched for blocks, its silence heavier than any chant. Reporters called it the most powerful moment Illinois had seen in decades. At the front, Elena walked with her family, holding her brother's picture close. She whispered to the woman beside her, "We march not for politics, but for peace." The woman nodded, tears streaming down her face. Overhead, a drone captured the sea of lights, broadcasting it live across the country. Viewers wept as they watched ordinary citizens reclaim their voice. In Washington, Trump watched the feed, his hand pressed to the desk. "This," he said softly, "is America's heart, and I will honor it." Meanwhile, Pritzker issued a fiery statement dismissing the march as optics. His words clashed violently with the images of glowing candles. By dawn, even national outlets called it a turning point. The people's silence had spoken louder than all his shouting. The next morning, Springfield's courthouse overflowed with reporters. Federal prosecutors filed an emergency motion citing credible evidence of systemic fraud. Cameras flashed as officials carried in stacks of sealed folders. Inside, the judge's voice cut through the chamber. All relevant financial documents will be preserved. Any interference will be treated as obstruction. Gasps rippled across the room. In the Oval Office, Trump was briefed. His tone remained calm but sharp. "We aren't here to punish Chicago. We're here to protect it. Fraud steals from families. We end that now." In the gallery, Elena sat clutching her brother's photo. For the first time in months, her heart felt lighter. Tears slid down her cheeks as she whispered, "This is justice, little brother. It's coming." Outside, crowds lifted homemade banners. "Protect Chicago families." End the lies. Their chant wasn't angry, it was hopeful, rising like a hymn. Nationwide, Americans understood this was no longer about politics. It was about truth finally catching up to power. Without warning, the president arrived in Chicago under tight security. There were no parades, no speeches, just a quiet walk through neighborhoods that had been drowning in fear. At first, residents peeked from windows. Then they poured into the streets. Mothers embraced him. Fathers shook his hand. Children waved homemade flags. Cameras caught the raw emotion. People crying, thanking him, pleading with him not to stop. At a small park, Elena stepped forward with trembling hands, holding her brother's picture. Trump studied it for a long moment before resting his hand gently on her shoulder. "I can't bring him back," he said softly. "But I will fight to make sure no other family feels this pain." Even hardened reporters were shaken. One whispered off camera, "I've never seen anything like this." The images raced across the nation. Not of a dictator, not of a tyrant, but of a leader standing with grieving citizens. By evening, even critics admitted, Pritzker's insult had been transformed into one of the most human, unforgettable moments of Trump's presidency. That night, a televised address united America. The setting was simple: a Chicago church filled with candles lit for victims of violence. Families sat behind the president, holding framed photos of loved ones. Elena was among them, her brother's face glowing from a portrait. Trump's voice was steady, almost breaking. "Tonight, we remember every child, every father, every mother taken too soon. We fight not for politics, but for life, for safety, for dignity, and I promise you, Chicago will rise again." As the camera panned across the families, tears flowing, hands clasped, the words appeared on screens across the country: "Hope reborn." Social media exploded with a single line: "We believe again." Meanwhile, Pritzker hid behind closed doors, his name forever tied to scandal. He had tried to humiliate Trump, but ended humiliated himself, not by politics, but by truth, by the people, and by history. The broadcast closed with Trump placing a single candle on the altar, its flame flickering in silence, a symbol of justice, of memory, and of hope finally returning. Trump placed a single candle on the altar. The screen slowly faded to black. 3 words glowing in white letters: "For our children." As tears fell across the nation, Americans felt not just anger or sorrow, but unity, pride, and faith that their leader would not abandon them. Dear viewers, if this story touched your heart, if it made you grieve for the families, cry for justice, and cheer for the truth, don't leave without taking action. Tap the like button so more people can hear this powerful story. Share your prayers and thoughts in the comments below. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel and join our community for exclusive updates and behind-the-scenes features. Together, we'll keep stories like this alive, stories that stand for truth, hope, and justice.